Hi. Uh, in this session, we will going to configure Access Gateway, and we will also see that why Access Gateway is used, and we will access a protected resource from a web server, and we will not go into much detailed configuration right now. We'll just do a simple configuration to access a protected resource from some of the web server. So the first thing is why access gateway is required. Access gateway is required if you want to provide a protected access to some of the web server. So protected access, what does it mean? So if you want to access a resource, what you do, you generally a HTTP resource, you will okay, let's see this picture. If suppose I have a browser and I have a web server, and in this web server there is a file which is at location/session, and the file name is info.php. If I want to access this file, what I will do, I will go to the browser and I will type this URL http:// IP address or host name of the web server, and then the path of the file of the resource and name of the file. When you do this, browser sends a HTTP request to the web server, and web server sends the HTTP page as a response. Now AG, what AG does? AG does or AG provides a protected access. This is not protected access. This is browser is directly access the web server. Protected access means all the protected access in the case of NAM means that all the request to the web server will come to the AG, and AG will forward this request to the web server. Web server will give response to the AG, and AG will send the response to the browser. So in this case, you can see the first request to the browser is making a request to the AG. The second request, AG is forwarding that request to the web server. The third is web server is providing the response to the AG, and fourth, AG is providing response to the browser. In this case, AG is protecting the web server, or it is protecting the resources under the web server. Now, when you want to access AG, how you in this case now how you going to access the protected resource from the web server? Then what you have to do, you have to use there's something called published DNS name. Published DNS name is the name which is given to AG to accept the HTTP request. So this name will be given to the user, that whenever you want to access something from the session web server or this web server, you have to use this particular DNS name. So you give a request HTTPS and give a HTTP request here, and here you can see I'm saying 12.lab.novel.com and making a request to the session and info.php file. So the first request is this. As this is published DNS name of the access gateway, the request will come to the access gateway, and access gateway will analyze this request, and based on its configuration it will identify that this request is for which web server, and it will make the request number second and send to the web server. So you can see the request number second is the same kind of request which is here when browser is directly communicating with the web server. So here mostly when we configure a AG, we have to take care of things like what is the protocol you want in between browser and access gateway, what is the published, whether it is a HTTPS secure communication or non-secure HTTP communication, what is the published DNS name of the AG, and what is the path that you are going to use to configure this protected resource. So if you see this session/info.php, it's a complete path on the web server. So this path we need to configure on the AG. Okay. Based on this configuration, AG will identify that this request is for the web server 164.99x.x and forward this request to the web server. Okay. Now for AG, there, when we start the before starting the configuration of AG, I would like you to familiar with some of the terms that we are going to use during configuration. So okay, so in this picture you can see this path is actually the protected resource because we are protecting info.php from direct access from the browser. Okay, so in access gateway configuration, what we do, okay, I forgot to mention one thing, that AG actually works as a reverse proxy here. Reverse proxy, what is reverse proxy and forward proxy, I can cover in the another session. For the time being, just understand that it behaves as a reverse proxy. Okay, now in a single access gateway you can configure multiple reverse proxies. Multiple reverse proxy, and one reverse proxy is different from the another reverse proxy based on the IP address and based on the port. So by using different IP address you can create multiple reverse proxy, and with the same IP address but using different port you can create the multiple reverse proxy. Now for every reverse proxy, so reverse proxy, you can say the property of reverse proxy is the IP address and port. Now if you go to the reverse proxy, in a single reverse proxy you can configure multiple proxy services. Proxy service is what, if in the previous picture you have seen msync12.lab.novel.com. So this is called the published DNS name. So you can create many published DNS name, and using that published DNS name you can access the web server behind access gateway. So reverse proxy contain multiple proxy services. What are the properties of the proxy services? Now, proxy service must be having a published DNS name so that you can use the browser and use this published DNS name to come to the access gateway. It must be having a web server. This web server is this one. Must be having a web server, so you need to configure the IP address or host name of the web server where the actual protected resource is residing. Okay, and then you have to create something called protected resource. So protected resource is nothing but this /sessioninfo.php. This is the protected resource that you need to configure. So again, access gateway can have multiple reverse proxy. One reverse proxy is different from the other reverse proxy by IP address and port or port. A reverse proxy can have multiple proxy services. So proxy services, one proxy service is different from the other proxy service based on the published DNS name. Okay, now proxy service uh, has its two types. One is called the path-based proxy service and another is called domain-based proxy service. I will cover that thing later in later session, but for the time being, a proxy service, one proxy service is different from the another proxy service using published DNS name. Okay, and the proxy service should have a published DNS name. It must be having a web server configured and it must be having the protected resource configured. Okay, in the protected resource section, you can configure multiple protected resources. Multiple protected resource means, if you take this example, in this info.php is under the session folder. What if I want to access all the files in the session folder? What if I want to use some other folders like /session /manjit /session /sales /session/ something? So all those kind of protected resources which is residing on the web server, you can configure here under protected resource section. So a protected resource will have a path which will be used to configure the actual path of this protected resource on the web server, and it will be having a authentication procedure. The authentication procedure here indicates whether when you access this particular protected resource, whether you will be asked for authentication or not. If you will assign some value here, Access Gateway will tell you to go to the IDP, authenticate yourself and come back. But if there is no procedure configured, Access Gateway directly pass this request to the web server. If Access Gateway sends you to identity provider, it is called protected resource. If it forwards directly to the web server without authentication, it is called public resource. So we will see this in much details later during configuration. Also, there is a term called policy. Policy, Access Gateway has different kind of policy which is applied on the HTTP request before sending the request to the web server. So the policies, there are multiple policies here. We will see this in the later section. For the now what we'll do, we will access the admin console and start configuring based on the understanding we achieved. Now here, like Access Gateway has a reverse proxy and it must have a proxy service, and all proxy service must be having the protected resource, and protected resource must be having path, authentication, and policy. Okay, so let's access the administration console. Okay, so what you have to do, you have to go to the edit. Okay, now you came here and you can see that there is one identity server which is configured and it is green, and there is a Access Gateway which is not configured. So you have to click here, and here you can see again, Access Gateway can run without creating a cluster. There is no need to create a cluster for Access Gateway if you have a single Access Gateway. But if you have multiple Access Gateway, then you need to create a cluster. But even if you create a cluster and put a single Access Gateway, there is no harm in that. What we'll do, we'll create a cluster here, session AG. So the type is Mag Appliance. Select this one, click OK. Okay, now you can see that it has went into there is a cluster created, and my access gateway 90 150 150 140 97 is under this. So if you are going to add another access gateway in this session AG cluster, it will come below this. Skip for the update. So right now it is showing the state as a pending because we have not configured anything. For the configuration, now we'll go to edit. In the edit, you have to go to reverse proxy section. If you see this picture, reverse proxy, access gateway can have multiple reverse proxy. So we will go to this section, and here you can see reverse proxy list. Reverse proxy list contain the reverse proxies. So what we'll do, we can create a reverse proxy here. We'll give the name as the session reverse proxy 1. Okay. Now, as it is the first reverse proxy you are creating, by default it will take a port 80 and secure port as 443. You can change this values, or if you want, if you're going to create another proxy, you need to give another value for the port. Okay, and right now it's using, I have configured only one IP address to the system, so you can see this IP address is here. Let's create a proxy service. I said that a reverse proxy will have multiple proxy services. So this indicates the proxy service list. Session proxy service 1. Okay. For every proxy service, you should be having a published DNS name, so that browser or user can use that published DNS name to come to the AG. This is the published DNS name. So I have published DNS name for this particular IP address, and that is for this particular IP address, the DNS name is this, so I will use this as a published DNS name. Web server IP address. So here I will configure the web server which is protected by this access gateway. So I will use header forward receive hostname. Just use this for the timing. I'll tell what is this in the later session. Okay, so now you can see you have created one proxy service. Like that, if you use new, you can use multiple reverse proxy service, but you should be having a different published DNS name. Okay, now I said that a proxy service has multiple protected resources. What we'll do, we'll go to this section, protected resource, where we have to configure protected resources. Okay. Here you can see protected resource list. So if you see, a proxy service can have multiple protected resources, and this protected resource, When you create stack session protected source one. Okay. I said you that it is having the property called path, where you have to mention the path which is residing on the web server, so that when AG sends a request, it sends the request to the correct location to the web server. So for our example, the info.php is under the session folder, so I'm giving session/star. I will give this path for all the files inside the session folder. Okay. Now, authentication procedure. Authentication procedure says whether access gateway will ask for authentication or not. So for the first attempt, we will just leave it blank to okay. So now you have configured a protected resource here, and it is a public resource because authentication procedure is none. I also said that there are some policies. So the policies are authorization, identity injection, form fill. We'll see it later. Go here now. Do OK. Go back. Do OK. You can see. Click update server on the identity server to make the changes to the server. You will go to the identity server. Okay. So Access Gateway is saying that there is, if you see this health, it is still not green. Okay, let's click this one. The embedded service provider does not has a configured trusted provider. So for this, what you have to do, you have to go to reverse proxy authentication, and here select the identity server cluster. After doing this, click OK. Okay. Okay. We'll go to the Access Gateway and see. Now it is green. It's happy. So what we have done, we have selected this identity provider for the authentication. So whenever the request will come, what Access Gateway does, it checks on what port this request is made, and it selects a reverse proxy. In the reverse proxy, again, it checks the published DNS name and find the proxy service, and then based on that, it finds the web server where the request has to go, and it goes to the protected resource list, and based on the path, it finds that what authentication procedure is there for this particular protected resource. Okay. Now, here is something we need to see here. This says enable SSL between browser and Access Gateway. So this will give you a secure communication. I want to enable this so that whenever I give a request to from the browser, I will use HTTPS in place of HTTP. Okay. So here you can see redirect request from non-secure port to the secure port. So suppose if you enable this, enable SSL between browser and Access Gateway, but still you gave a HTTP request to the AG. In that case, AG will convert that request to the HTTPS. This check is for that. Server certificate. Now as it is a HTTPS communication, there must be a certificate for this. So for this demo, I will use the auto generated key. So it will generate a certificate for me. Click OK. Okay. Now, you just this we will I will explain all this thing in the later section, but for the just now our aim is to access the protected resource and configure the access gateway. We'll click this. Okay. Whenever you make some changes in the access gateway and that change has some relation with the identity provider, you need to update the identity provider also. Okay, so now access gateway is also green, identity provider is also green. What I will do, I will go and access the protected resource. Access the protected resource, I will use HTTPS because I have configured that. Then publish DNS name of access gateway. Then the path configured for the web server. Then the resource. When I hit this, okay, so now you can see this is a PHP file which just dump all the HTTP header, request header on the page. So here you can see I am able to access this page from the web server. So this is called the protected access. If you see, this file is similar to if I go directly to the web server. This is called unprotected access. You are directly access the resource from the web server, but when you access the same resource from the web server, it's called the protected access. Okay, let's do some change in the, we'll go to session here, protected resource, and in this protected resource right now it's a public resource because we have not given any authentication procedure. Let's give an authentication procedure and see. I'm taking here authentication procedure, secure name password form. Okay, update it. Press. Okay, so every time you do update in the access gateway, you have to make sure that this is green and this command status is succeeded. Let's go to the identity server. It is also green and everything is okay. Now we'll access the protected resource, because we have given an authentication procedure there, so it became a protected resource from a public resource. Oops. Okay. Unable to authenticate. What's this? Let's check.